This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hey, Noah here. I'm a former architectural designer and now an indie game developer creating the open world pixel art game Chef RPG. In this video, I want to talk about how to develop a design concept for your projects and how to generally improve your design skills so that you can consistently come up with better ideas. A concept serves as the foundation for your creation. It's the core driving idea of your project and will affect all future design decisions. So, what kind of things can be considered a design concept? In architecture, it can be your building's unique way of organizing space, the way the architecture speaks to the local heritage, the way it interacts with nature, or simply the visual impact of the spaces you create. In video games, the concept could be a unique gameplay mechanic, a unique narrative or art style, or creating a player fantasy that they have never experienced before. In essence, it's a framework of values that gives your project a unique identity. Creating a design concept first requires an understanding of the project's constraints and goals. If I'm designing a building, I first need to gain an understanding of the project's site and the client needs. If I'm building a product, say a smartphone, I would need to do research on what competitors have created so I can make a product that can stand out. If building a video game, I would first need to set some constraints. Without constraints, you would be designing in a void, and any design decisions you make would have no meaning. Deciding on a genre and determining your target audience would be a good start. After you understand the project's needs, the next step is to start finding ideas. Now, we all get great ideas from time to time, ideas that we must write down and implement, or the next big idea to start that next project. But the unfortunate reality is, most of the ideas that we come up with are not as good as we think. When an idea pops up in our head, it's initially contained in a bubble. Essentially, it is an idea created in a vacuum with no feedback or anything to compare to. Even if the idea is objectively good, there could be 100 other even better solutions that is invisible to us unless we keep searching for them. So, as an example, let's say I'm competing in an architecture competition and I'm given the brief to design an art gallery by this harbor of Helsinki, Finland. This is a big waterfront site that has a lot of cultural and historical significance. Let's say I really like boats, and because it's a harbor, I get the great idea to design the building in the shape of a boat. The design concept will be that it's a physical manifestation of the site's nautical history. It will be the Arc of Helsinki. So I'm super happy with my design concept. The design expresses my personal interests very well, the idea makes sense, and so I'm feeling confident about this competition. Now, this actually happens to be the site of a real competition held a couple years ago to create a new Guggenheim art gallery. Let's say I submitted this art design that I'm super confident about, and let's say my drawing and rendering skills are just as good as any other team, and I put in just as much time and effort. The deciding factor then will be on the design and the main concept. But I'm super happy with my main design and concept, so it should go great, right? I submit my entry, but when the results come back, my entry didn't even crack the top 200. What happened? The idea was so great. Shouldn't it have at least gotten a mention? So obviously, there could be a lot of things wrong with the design, but one of the mistakes I made is that I had encased my idea in a bubble. A lot of times when we first come across an idea that we are excited about, we immediately jump on it and stop looking at other ideas. Our own good idea prevents us from moving forward with the design and limits the project's potential. A second mistake, and something that happens a lot, is that you become influenced by your own preferences. In this scenario, my love for boats, and become overly attached to your idea. Now, there's nothing wrong with chasing your interests and working on something that you're passionate about. But the problem lies when you become overly attached to your project and ideas. It's easy to become blind to its weaknesses. As a designer, this attachment will prevent you from doing your job properly. It's important not to mistake your own preferences for what is objectively good. For example, I could really like the futuristic flowing buildings of architect Zaha Hadid, but that doesn't mean it would be a good idea to utilize this sort of design for a low-cost social housing project in a historic neighborhood. It's important to be able to adapt your design style to the constraints and project needs. Thinking about both issues, I remembered an interesting design exercise from architecture school. The assignment had been to design a staircase, but in the style of another famous architect. What this assignment does is it makes you break away from your own comfort zone and approach the same design from the perspective of someone else. Some may interpret this assignment as just copying a different visual style, but I'd recommend going even further and learn the values and processes of that designer or artist, and almost pretend that you are that person, approaching this project with a fresh set of eyes. By doing that, it forces you to explore an alternate design process and see the project from a brand new perspective. By pretending to be someone else, it's a lot harder to become attached to your design, and you slowly begin to see the design from the outside and design without personal influences. And it doesn't even need to be a specific designer. You could even embody the role of a character completely outside your profession. Say for example, I approach the same art gallery design but pretend I'm an environmentalist. So now my values have shifted. Instead of thinking about what kind of building I would like to see or what would look cool, I'm thinking of what kind of building would be the most environmentally friendly and approach the design from that angle. For example, we can retrofit the existing structure instead of tearing it down, which would reduce the amount of construction waste. To have a smaller impact on a site, we can limit the additional structure to just one story, so my foundation piles don't need to be very deep. I could create walls using only recycled materials like paper, tubes, and recycled plastic. In the area surrounding the building, we can create a park that utilizes naturally growing, low-maintenance vegetation. So now we have a design concept with a strong environmental focus. Of course, this design wouldn't do so well either. Despite the environmental benefits, a Guggenheim art gallery would require an iconic building structure that can stand alongside the previous Guggenheim museums. But now I've created a design concept completely outside my own interests and preferences, a design that can expose the flaws of my first concept. You can begin to see areas where your original great idea can improve. Of course, I can do this process a couple more times. In the next design option, I can focus on maximizing outdoor public spaces and connecting to the city. And in another concept, I can pretend that I'm a fashion designer and create a building with forms inspired by fashion, utilizing intricate weaved fabrics for interior walls. What I'm essentially doing is that I'm creating a mini competition between the many design approaches I embody. If you can select a clear winner out of 5 to 10 different ideas, you'll usually be in a great spot with the design. By approaching a design problem through multiple lenses, it will help break you out of the trap on getting stuck on a single good idea and becoming overly attached. It can even help to massively improve your original idea. In the end, I can still decide that the original arc idea was indeed the best option, but now I have 10 other ideas that can help prove that the first idea had some merit. And in all likeliness, I've come up with ways to improve the original design. I could perhaps have realized that the overall form needs to be more subtle and shouldn't just look like a big boat. There are ways to greatly enhance its connectivity to the surroundings. The building could utilize recycled materials. It could have more beautiful interiors through using fabrics. You don't want to just get one good idea and stop searching. It's important to push the idea even further and explore alternatives to form an even stronger design concept. Before moving on, I want to take a moment to talk about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for hosting and building websites. They have a ton of great templates that you can choose from, and I recently used Squarespace to create a website for Chef RPG. What surprised me was the amount of customization available, and you can mix and match different templates to create pages suited to your needs. Squarespace lets you insert short videos, so I put one right at the front page, which looks pretty cool. They have a great automated image scaling system, so I never have to worry about if images or videos are cropped incorrectly. Scrolling down, we have a system for collecting emails, which can be linked to Squarespace's emailing system if you ever need to send out important updates. They also have great portfolio tools that automatically adjust the layouts, which allowed me to create a screenshots page where you can click and enlarge individual images. It's definitely a very useful platform for artists and designers looking to create an online portfolio, or game developers looking to make a website for their game. If you're interested, check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/pixelarchitect to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now back to the video. It would be great to get external feedback at this stage. Usually, if you show someone your design, they could say it's good or bad. But in reality, this feedback doesn't mean much since there isn't a context to compare your project to. Good could mean that it's just good enough for a high school project. Instead, if you can show them several options to pick from instead of saying it's good or bad, They can directly pick out what they think is the strongest idea and not worry about having to sugarcoat things to spare your feelings. Regardless of the time it takes, this early portion of a project is very important to get right, especially if there are any stakes involved. If you're planning on sinking months or years of your time into a project, whether it be to design a product, a building, or a video game, the core design concept will impact all future design decisions and the eventual success of your project. So it's definitely important to make sure that the core concept is as good as it can be before diving too deep. I want to note that once you develop a project further, you might end up with multiple design ideas to the point where it's hard to tell which one is the primary concept. This is perfectly fine and normal. A project should evolve over time, and it's unlikely that you won't discover meaningful additions along the development process. But having a core concept in the beginning gives you a direction to push your project towards and give meaning to every design decision. If we look at the finalists of the Guggenheim competition, these designs do many things very well. If we just look at the winning design, we can break it down into several core ideas that are all very significant. It created a very iconic lighthouse shape that can stand alongside other Guggenheim museums. It has a broken up mass, which creates fantastic interior spaces that are highly connected to the exterior. It possesses a materiality that speaks to the natural environment in Finland. And there's obviously a lot more positive things going on with this entry, as well as with all the other designs. The point is, with all these finalist designs, they are not the result of personal expression or trying to create that architect's dream building, but rather the result of rigorous design processes and addressing the design brief through multiple lenses. Now, I'm not trying to say that everyone should be aiming to win prestigious competitions, since we are all at different points along our own journey, but by approaching a design project through multiple angles, you'll learn to break out of your own ideas bubble. It will help build a big library of design ideas that will help turn your good idea into a great idea. You may feel very passionate towards a certain process or style, but it's likely because you haven't discovered an even better process yet. A lot of well-established artists or designers have seemingly created a particular style, but the truth is, these artists are familiar with a wide variety of styles and design approaches, and if you ask them to, they could create fantastic work that is completely outside their own established style. I've discussed how to refine and manage your ideas. Now, what happens if we don't have any ideas to begin with? For creatives, it's common to sometimes get stuck in a creative rut, where you run out of ideas or just can't find a concept that you're happy with. The obvious thing to do then is to turn to references. If I'm designing a building, the first thing is to look at other buildings for reference. But people often forget that you don't just need to look for inspiration inside your own profession. If I'm designing a building, I can draw inspiration from nature, from fashion, from culture, or even from video games. And the same thing applies if I'm creating a video game. Using Chef RPG as an example, the gameplay format features a combination of Stardew Valley and Restaurant City, both of which are video games. However, the initial game idea is inspired by Gordon Ramsay's Great Escape TV show, where you see chefs going into the wilderness to collect fresh ingredients and use what they discover to create their dishes. The game's world utilizes ideas from Archigram and Retrofuturism, both of which are artistic movements with a lot of rich ideas. Major themes in the game include environmentalism and consumerism, which will impact the gameplay and the game's aesthetic. Now, this may seem like an obvious thing, but having worked with a lot of designers, I can say that most people forget to utilize this whole other world of inspiration. Last year, there was the game Hades, which is a great but fairly standard roguelike game. However, its use of Greek mythology played a major role in the game's massive success. Just the name Hades drew a lot of attention since it's a name that everyone recognizes and is a character with a rich lore. Instead of having a cast of new characters, the game utilized famous characters that people already had a fascination with. By doing this, they could build upon the rich lore and stories of the Greek gods instead of having to create lore from scratch, which is extremely difficult. The game Among Us is derived from the party game Werewolf. There is also Fall Guys, where their primary idea came from the show Wipeout. Of course, you could extract ideas in a similar fashion when designing a building or creating a product. Video games are just a representation or an abstraction of things from our real world, and early video games that everyone loves to reference wouldn't exist without designers taking inspiration from real-world activities. And often the best ideas can be found in places where no one else is looking. Finally, when we do use references, it's important to break the reference down into parts rather than just copying what's on the surface. To use an example, we'll look at the Pompidou Center in Paris. This is a modern art gallery and cultural center located close to central Paris. It was the winner of an international architecture competition and was built in 1977. The idea of the building is that it turns the building inside out, displaying all the structure and mechanical systems on the outside of the building. A glass-enclosed escalator runs diagonally across the front side of the building, adding to its iconic look. Whether or not you like the appearance of the building, there are a lot of valuable ideas to draw from it. Let's say you're a designer who really loves this building, and this building has inspired you to create your own art gallery design. You could replicate this aesthetic of an inside-out building with pipes and tubes running along the exteriors. There's nothing wrong with it if you really like the aesthetic, but if that's the only thing you draw from the Pompidou Center, you'd be missing out on a lot of rich ideas the project brings. The main reason that this design won the competition, which had over 600 entries, was that it was the only submission that left an open space on the site to form a piazza. By giving back a piazza to the city, this is no longer just a self-contained attraction for people to visit once. The piazza becomes a permanent public space for the city that can be used for a wide variety of events. The building becomes an exciting backdrop for regular citizens who just wants to come to the piazza and hang out. Another concept that the Pompidou Center brings is that it gives visitors a new perspective of Paris using these glass tubes. Most museums and art galleries focus their design efforts on making gallery spaces as comfortable as possible and ignore connecting with its surroundings. In the Pompidou Center, these glass tubes are detached from the gallery spaces and act as a viewing platform to look over Paris. If we look on the map, the Eiffel Tower sits right here, and the front side of the Pompidou Center is here. So as you ascend the escalator, you get increasingly better views over Paris facing the Eiffel Tower. This is one of the few art galleries that has this outward approach towards the city through its big piazza and the observation tubes. It becomes a fun destination in the city rather than being just a self-contained structure for viewing artwork. If I'm viewing the Pompidou Center as a reference, a better approach could be to develop a concept based on the idea of giving back public space to the city, having architecture be a dynamic backdrop for daily activities and events, or focusing on designing spaces for maximizing enjoyment and excitement. These are all objectively positive traits to have in a building. The aesthetic is up to your own personal taste, and you can decide to follow it or not. So when you're using references, it's important to look past what's on the surface and dig deeper into the core concepts, and you'll discover extremely valuable ideas for your own projects. What's on the surface is just an aesthetic, and only referencing surface level ideas won't help you create that great design concept you're looking for. Aside from directly reading about it in books, the best way to break down and discover core architectural concepts is by visiting the building in person. Video games are not so different from architecture. You can break down the core qualities of a game by playing it and making note of moments where you are excited, moments that make you stop and enjoy the atmosphere, and places where time seems to fly by without you even noticing. It's like you're a chef and you want to invent a new cake recipe inspired by another cake you just ate. You want to discover the individual ingredients of the cake and use that information to create your own cake mix. In design, if you only copy surface level qualities, it would be the equivalent of throwing the entire first cake into your new cake mix. It might work out, but you're just rolling the dice at that point. Most likely, what you make won't be as good as the original. So to sum up, approach a design concept through multiple angles and don't create a bubble around your idea. Remember to look for inspiration outside your field and break down references into parts rather than just copying what's on the surface. Creating design concepts is a skill that can be practiced and improved over time, and through practice you can learn to generate consistently better ideas for your projects. So that's about it. I hope the tips in this video can help you along your design journey and give you some insight towards your next project. I'll be back with more updates for Chef RPG in a couple weeks. Thanks for watching and see you next time.